Hello, I'm Professor Benavides, and I want to go ahead and give you my review of the chapter called Procedural Methods. So in this chapter, we'll learn how to create methods, some with no arguments and some with arguments. And these will not return anything. Methods, what are they? It's kind of like a way of dividing and conquering, right? And they work hand in hand with classes. So a class is a blueprint for an object, and a method just gives you the behavior, the action for that object. So a method is a set of instructions that can be used upon request. So for example, here, object methods are written for the class from which the object was created. Notice if I have an object called Froggy in Alice, the dot operator separates it from the method called jump. And in this particular case, jump performs an action, which is what methods do. This particular method, comma delimited, passes two things into it, which is forward and 1.5. These are arguments for parameters. So that's based upon the definition of the method. We see that in methods that we use all the time. For example, the show message dialog methods of the J-option pane class. These are static methods here. They're not associated with an object. We have method. You know what gives it as a dead giveaway that's a method is it's got this parenthesis, right? This is also another comma delimited argument on here. So these are arguments for the parameter. And of course, this particular method's in the API for the J-option pane. So a parameter is a special variable that receives information that we send to a method. And we can see that in Alice by clicking on the tabs procedure or function. So a procedure does not return a value to whereas a function does. Notice the words that are being used here. For functions, you see words like get width, get height. For procedures, you see things like say, think, move. They don't give the impression that they're returning anything. So the API, this is something that all programmers will need to become intimately familiar with if they want to be good Java programmers. As far as the syntax is concerned for a method, we've got the access modifier, static, the return type, the method name, and then the list of parameters. So the word static means that that method is not associated with an object. The return type would make it, if it had a return type, that would make it a function. For our purposes in this chapter, we're going to be having a return of void. That makes it a procedure. The method names must comply with the same rules, conventions for variables. Can't start it with a number, etc. So we're going to go ahead and look at some examples. I'm going to provide you with these example codes. Right after we finish this, we'll just go ahead and run these. What I did was I went ahead and just typed these in from the book so that we can experience. Of course, I embellished them a little bit. So our first example here is a method called printIt. It only has one line of code on here because we just want to know how it works. So in this particular case, inside of main, I call printIt. Print the flow of control leaves here, goes to the method, and does this line of code, and then comes back to main. Of course, you see here there's nothing after this, but if there was something after that, it would go ahead and do that as well. So here is the code inside of NetBeans, where inside of main we have the call. Below it we have the definition, the method definition, which contains, in this case, a public access, static, void, and the name of the method. The name of the method must include the opening and closing parentheses. The call, when you're calling a method, it must be done from inside of main, and you must specify the name of the method and the parentheses, open parentheses, close parentheses, and you must pass it as many arguments as there are parameters in terms of number, type, and sequence. So as we go on here, we continue with another simple example. This example is another parameterless method called print initials. Here's the definition here, and we have the call inside of main. Print in, and interesting thing here, the way you can embellish this is you could call this method many times, and it will go and do. You won't need to go ahead and go to the drudgery of typing in the initials over and over and over again. Okay. So parameters, let's talk about parameters. She starts off with one, I think barely goes to two. So in your definition, you'll specify the parameters. And then when you call the method, you're going to need to pass as many arguments as there are parameters. And you'll need to pass them in terms of number, sequence, and type. Okay, so if it's a string double Boolean, then you must pass it a string double and Boolean. Okay. So this very simple example here, again, print it. In this particular case, it has one parameter, a string, which receives a string, and it simply prints it on the screen. Inside of main, we have three calls, and we pass it string literals. Java can be fun, Java can be hard, bye bye. Sounds like a song, right? So another example on here, one involving numbers. Let's take a quick look here. I've got the method definition here at the bottom, convert to Celsius. It has a one parameter variable. It calculates Celsius. This is a procedure function. And then in main, I notice that I assigned 212 to Fahrenheit, and I'm going to call this method three different ways. And this is just done to just show you all the different ways you can do this. So I can call the method passing it a variable name. I can call it passing it a numeric literal. I can call it passing the result of a formula. Okay, so these two things are added together. The result of that is then passed to convert to Celsius. When I pass these arguments, they go into the parameter variable, in this case, F. Usually, Java programmers are a little more wordy other than F, but given that we have, wanted to put everything on the screen here, F is fine. Okay, so that's the explanation of how that works. And then that brings us to the end here. She has, some examples of putting methods in other classes. I will show you that. Let's just take a quick look at the summary. So in her summary, she goes through a review of the syntax of a method declaration. And this is where, she talks about the relationship of methods to objects, because it's really important that you understand what a class is, what an object is, what a method is. It's all part of OOP, object-oriented programming. Okay, so that pretty much is my rendition of the chapter. Let's go ahead and look at the code, some example code now for this chapter, chapter 7. Again, here I went ahead and put it into comments. Let me go ahead and uncomment out this first section on here, and I embellished it a little bit. It's from your book. If you remember, the first thing she did is she called print it. I put a blank line, and then she talked about the print initials, another blank line, and then she went ahead and passed Java can be fun, Java can be hard, bye bye. And then I just went ahead and put a little blank line on there. So let's look at the first method. Simply is this very simple one-liner. So when I call print it right here, it'll go ahead and do this line and then come back to the next line inside of main. And then it'll continue, when it calls print initials, it'll go and do this, right? And I can call print initials various times, and it'll go ahead and do this. So the next thing it does is it calls printed to. So I just called it printed to. It's a little embellishment on here is where I show where we're passing an argument here, because this particular method has one parameter variable. So whatever it is that you pass, gets put in there. Okay, that's printed to. So printed to is called 1, 2, 3 times. And every time I call it, I pass it a different string literal. So every time I call it, it goes in Java can be fun goes into X, and then system.out.println is called, or is that particular string is passed to the print line method, and it prints. Okay. So let's just go ahead and run and take a quick look. So yeah, it says here it is, where we've got hello world and then YN. I wonder whose initials were YN. Somebody, I guess I need to ask. I didn't do mine because I didn't want to do an R, so I just did what was in the book. So Java can be fun, Java can be hard, bye bye. Sounds like an 80s song, right? So let's go ahead and go on to the next bit of code here. And the way I do this is I'll just do a / press enter, and then I'll just get this the ending thingy on there and then put it over here. Okay, and then I'll uncomment this other stuff down here, and we'll go ahead and use those, All right, so in this particular case, and again, you can collapse the methods so that they don't get in your way of thinking on here, because we're only going to be dealing with convert to Celsius right now. Okay, so for convert to Celsius, in this particular case, and this was the demo that was in your book, I passed 212 to Fahrenheit, and then I passed Fahrenheit to the convert to Celsius call. So this is right here, this is calling, this method. And so it passes the variable, and the variable Fahrenheit goes into F. Then F is used inside the body of the method on here. One thing that probably I should have, you could do with any concepts. Actually, what I'm going to show you I'm going to show you a little bit of the debugger inside here. This is a great tool to use on loops, any kind of flow of control stuff on here. So just go ahead and go to debug on here, and then click on F7, and let's just walk through this. So the first thing that I notice here is I'm going to go ahead and assign 212 to Fahrenheit. I'm pressing F7, and you notice how Fahrenheit down here in the bottom has got 212, and it's a double. Okay, so then look at what's going to happen right now. When I press F7, it's going to go from line 20, and it's going to come all the way down over here to the bottom. You want to learn more about debugging? It's in the back of your book in an appendix. Very important stuff. So Fahrenheit goes into F. Notice how F now has 212 when I point to it, and it goes through this equation. And green is a line that's going to get calculated but hasn't been calculated yet. So as I continue to press F7, calculus gets the Celsius gets calculated as to 100, and I continue to press F7, and then boom, flow of control comes back to main. That's something that you most definitely need to understand. Control starts in main. You call the method. In this particular case, you don't have to pass anything, but you do have to pass something. If the definition has parameters, you must pass them in terms of number, sequence, and type. We'll talk a little bit more about that. That's actually discussed more in the next chapter. So you're just going to pressing F7 on here. You see the flow of control going on here, and it comes back, and boom, it's terminating right here, the next line. And that's pretty much the end of my presentations on procedural methods. Well, thank you very much. That's all I have to say.